Hi there, welcome back to the Flask Mastery series. In this session, we are going to build an endpoint that retrieves all our users from the database. So let's get started. So first of all, we are going to create a user controller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy our auth controller and paste it within our users folder. So having pasted it here, I'm going to make sure that I'm renaming it. So this is going to be users controller or user controller. And having renamed it, I'm going to ensure that I'm deleting some of the import statements that are not going to be useful for this task. So I'll delete that. And secondly, I'm going to also rename the blueprint to users instead of auth. So users, and I'll ensure that I'm deleting all these other functions because we are not going to work with them. So I'm going to go ahead and add a comment here, retrieving all users from the database. So we know that in the database we are having all user types. We have the authors, the admins, and then the system administrators. So this endpoint is going to ensure that we are fetching all these users and returning them in our response. So I'm going to make use of one of the functions within our auth controller. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this function and paste it here. And I'm going to delete all these other unnecessary statements. So the decorator for this route is going to be pointing to our blueprint name, which is users, and then the method that we are going to work with for this request is going to be get. Then with the fact that we are having a prefix, which is API/version1/users, then we can just add a backslash for this URL. Then I'm also going to update the name of the function to be get all users. So for us to be able to fetch or retrieve all the users from the database, we are first of all going to create a variable that is going to store all this data from the database when we make a query. So the variable name is going to be all users, and I'm going to assign it to make a query on our model user. So this is going to be user, and since it is a class, we have to start with a capital letter. So we access our model and we make a query. So user.query.all. So what happens whenever we make a query against our model while working with an object relational mapper, we have to always ensure that the variable is serialized. So for instance, if we try to return this variable, let's say return JSONify, and then let me just make it precise. We'll return the variable itself, all users, and make a request. So first of all, we are going to try to test this to see the kind of response that is returned for cases whereby we are not serializing the data. Serializing the data is the same as us having the ability of returning a variable that can be converted to JSON easily. So the first thing I'm going to do is ensuring that I'm registering our blueprint within our application factory function. So I'll ensure that we are importing it. So from app.controllers, we import the user controller and we access the user's blueprint object. Then we ensure that we are registering it. So app.register blueprint users. So having done that, we are now going to go ahead and run the application. So within Postman, under our authors API collection, I'm going to create a new folder that is going to store all the endpoints for the users resource. So the folder name is going to be users, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a new request, and then the request name is going to be get all users. Then the URL for this endpoint is going to be users, then slash, because we defined a prefix for our blueprint, which was API/version1 then /users. Then to access the endpoint or the route that retrieves all the users from the database, we have to append a slash. So I'm going to make a request. So when you try to make a request, we get a response that object of type user is not JSON serializable. So that means that we have to convert this data, our variable all users, into a format that can be easily serialized or converted into JSON. So we are going to go ahead and create a variable called users data, and this is going to be an empty list. So having created this variable, we are now going to go ahead and loop through our variable for all the users from the database. And the way we loop through this, because by default it's a list, so we are going to say for user in all users. Then I'm going to go ahead and create a dictionary called user info that is going to create the different keys and values for our user information. So the first thing we are going to define is the ID, and the value for the ID is going to be user. We are accessing this value, this variable we are using to loop through. So this is going to be user.id, and then the next key is going to be the first name, and then the value is going to be accessed by the user variable, then dot the first name. Then we also need the last name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this up such that we'll use it for the last name. And then the value still is going to be last name. We also have the username attribute on our user model. So this is going to be user, and we know that we have a function get full name that accesses or that returns the user's last name and first name concatenated together. So this is going to be get full name. Then we also need the user's email, and then the value is going to be user.email. Then I'm also going to go ahead and define a key for the contact, and then the value for this case is going to be user.contact. Then we also need the user type, so this can be the type. Then we access the variable user, then dot the user type. And lastly, we can also pass in a timestamp for the created at, such that this has a value of user.created at. So having created our user info dictionary, we are now going to go ahead and ensure that we are appending this data within our users data list. So we are going to access the user list, which is users data, then dot, we append. In other words, we add all this data to this list, and the way we do that is by accessing or by working with the append function. So we are going to append in the user info dictionary, this that has been created. So having done that, we also have to ensure that we are returning a customized response. So we can define a message key, and this is going to be all users retrieved successfully. And then we are also going to ensure that we are returning the user object. So this is going to be users, and I'll ensure that we are returning the users data. So this is going to be users data list. And whenever we successfully return all the users that are stored in our database, we have to ensure that we are returning a status code. And the status code for this case, with the fact that we are just getting the data, it's going to be 200, which stands for OK. So I'm going to access it, http 200, and having we implemented the logic, I'm going to ensure that I'm clearing up the terminal and running the application. So when I make a new request, we can pretty see that all our users are returned from the database, and we can also customize the response furthermore. So the way we are going to do this is by us creating a variable that is going to store. Actually, we can keep it precise. We can go ahead and define a variable called total users, and we are going to work with a len method such that we access the total number of users that are stored in the database. So the variable we have to pass in here is going to be our list, and this has been defined as users data. Then I'll ensure that I'm adding a comma. So when I make a new request, the total number of users in the database are 7. I hope you found this session insightful. Thanks for watching, and see you again in the next session.